Hey everyone, welcome to the Natural Cures Summit and Movement. I'm your host today, Dr. Josh Axe. So excited to have Donna Gates with us here today. Donna is one of the leading experts in the country on the microbiome and on transforming your digestive health. And today we're going to talk about Candida cures, this topic of Candida, and how it can actually have a bigger impact on your health than you might realize. And so just a little bit about Donna here. I met Donna years ago, and I really respected her, followed her website, bodyecology.com, used some of her kefir starters she sold online, and spent a lot of time reading a lot of her expert articles on the digestive health microbiome and beating this condition we call Candida. And she's an advanced fellow with the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. She's the author of a best-selling book called The Body Ecology Diet, which is a book I absolutely loved. And really for the past 25 years, she has been leading this movement in natural health when it comes to the microbiome and digestive system. And so Donna, hey, welcome to the summit.
Oh, I'm glad to be back together again, Josh. Thank you.
Great. Well, I know we get to see each other a few times a year at different health summits. In fact, last seminar we were at together, I loved your biotic drink you had. In fact, I ordered some more. It's awesome. You've got so many great probiotic products you have on your website.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that. It is a probiotic. You know, you look at it and think it looks like a big Sprite or something sitting in the bottle, but it's a really powerful probiotic. Maybe I can, weave that into why it is, and as we talk along here.
Yeah, I know it's one of the things that we'll probably talk about in a little bit, one of those Candida remedies that can really help get your digestive system and getting some of those, more of those good bacteria in the gut. But let's go ahead and jump in. Let's talk about what is Candida and why is it such an issue today? And I hear this all the time, and you were saying this earlier before we started here, is that a lot of women today say, I've got a yeast infection, maybe it's not that big of a deal. But talk about what is Candida and why is it an issue?
Well, that's a really good point, Josh, that a lot of the things that we, are dealing with today, health problems, so many people have gotten to the point where they just accept them. Like every young woman in, say, her 30s and 20s and younger, they have cramping when they have their periods, for example, and they just think, oh, yeah, I have my period, I have cramping. That's not normal. And so same thing with a yeast infection. It's like, oh, yeah, I have a yeast infection. Everybody has a yeast infection. Like, it's no big deal. But it's actually a really big deal because the yeast infection is a very, very serious infection in the body. And if it gets acute enough, you can absolutely die from it. And people do all the time, every day, because, it's always present in someone with cancer, always present in somebody with diabetes. And really, in my opinion, I've never worked with any condition when somebody didn't have a yeast infection. Babies, children are born with it today. Every single autistic child I've ever worked with over the last 9 years has always come into the world with a yeast infection. So, but then let's say you have cancer and you go for radiation or chemotherapy. Those conditions suppress the immune system, and then the infection becomes so acute. That's when a person dies from it. But the death certificate will say that they died from cancer, and they had cancer, they died, but they actually really died because of the yeast infection. So I'm only saying that because, first of all, I want people to realize it's something serious, and secondly, good to know there's a way to solve the problem. So many people have been for years and years and years dealing with the yeast infection that they just think it's hopeless. And it can seem like that unless you understand what you're dealing with and know exactly what to do to get rid of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about this because I think there's probably a lot of people out there, Donna, that actually have Candida and they don't realize it. So talk about some of the most common symptoms people can have, because I believe that they can probably manifest differently in every person.
Very good point, because it depends on what part of the body so we can also use the word candidiasis, we can say yeast, we can say fungal infection. So I'm going to say yeast infection right now. So where are the yeasts growing in the body? Where are they? They're secreting toxins. Over 79 different dangerous toxins have been identified so far. So, like there's one toxin in particular that causes eczema and psoriasis and affects the skin, and other toxins cause and they're also always needing to eat. So you have super cravings for sugar and carbohydrates because they want that to eat. That's what affects what feeds them. And so they're signaling, they have a huge connection to your nervous system, and they're signaling you what to eat all the time. So they very much control the body. But there's symptoms around eating disorders. I honestly think that so many young teenage girls are being diagnosed today with eating disorders, but they have yeast infections. And so instead of going through psychiatric treatments, they should be on a diet change that's bringing the yeast under control, but very much affecting the brain. Depression, moodiness. Some of the toxins that they produce affect the brain. One toxin in particular, acetaldehyde. If you drink alcohol, you are making acetaldehyde, and it's a very, very dangerous toxin. Some people say the most dangerous toxin in the body. But with a yeast infection, you're making acetaldehyde all the time, whether you're drinking or not. So some people don't clear it very effectively genetically, so they're really in worse shape. But that acetaldehyde is affecting their thyroid. It actually keeps T4 from becoming T3, and T3 is the active form of thyroid that gives energy to the cell. So it makes the person cold and have low thyroid symptoms. And of course that means dry skin, and their hair falls out, and their periods are, they have hormone imbalances and so on, and moodiness and all comes along with that too. There's just all the problems are related to the substances that the yeast are secreting. But if a woman different body cavities, like you can have a vaginal infection, you can have asthma, it can be up in your sinuses. Most sinus conditions are caused by yeast. And ear infections, don't just go to the doctor and say, oh, I need an antibiotic for my sinus infection or my ear infection, because there's an excellent chance that it's a fungal infection, and antibiotics don't work for that. Men have a tendency to have more things like jock itch, fungus growing on their toenails, but that's a sign that it's actually growing in the body. Even if it's showing up like on your toenails, you have it deep in your body. But it can cause infertility, urinary tract infections. It's very much connected to endometriosis, painful intercourse in women. Now getting to autoimmune diseases, autism, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, MS. Everybody with MS should be on a diet to control their yeast infection. Chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and also this huge sensitivity that we have all over the world, it seems, to gluten, the protein that you find in wheat and rye and barley, for example. Well, the immune system has to work very, very hard to bring the yeast under control. And, flour products that have gluten in them, they look like, to the immune system, when you eat those, the gluten looks like yeast. Literally, structurally, they're identical to the immune system. Yeast in your body and gluten look identical. It's the same protein, basically. So the immune system attacks the gluten, and that creates an autoimmune response to the gluten. I think the quality of gluten and the fact that people have yeast is actually one reason people are reacting to gluten like they do, which you don't ever hear anyone talk about that. And then let's say you have a baby, you give birth to a baby, and the baby has cradle cap or thrush in their mouth, and their digestion is off, like they scream from the beginning of life with they have kind of like a colitis type of a problem. Or actually, some babies, it's even been shown now that a large number of babies are coming into the world with a colitis type inflammation in the gut, but it's being caused by the yeast. Like they did a study on little children that were born prematurely, and every single one of those children already had a yeast infection that was inflaming their gut. So constipation, diarrhea in a newborn child, diaper rash, eczema. The eczema shows up very early in young children today. Many children by the age of 2 are really struggling with eczema. It's all related to yeast.
Wow. There are a number of things you're saying here, from hormonal issues to skin issues and a lot of other things I know that can be related to a lot of chronic yeast and candida issues as you're talking about. Let's talk about one of the most common health conditions that I see this associated with, aside from being diagnosed with candidiasis. What role does candida have in creating digestive issues like irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's, colitis, really any type of inflammatory bowel disease?
Well, the yeast can grow in the digestive tract, and that's what commonly happens when someone takes an antibiotic. They destroy the good bacteria in the gut, and then the yeast, which are living there in a harmless form, they're naturally present in the body, but in a harmless form. But at this point, when all the bacteria there's supposed to be a wonderful diversity of bacteria in our gut, and they hold each other in check. And so the bacteria are also holding the yeast in check and keeping them in a non-pathogenic form. But once the good bacteria are wiped out, the yeast become very aggressive. They grow tentacles. They burrow into the mucosal lining of the gut, and that causes that inflammation, which could be leaky gut. It could become more severe and begin to cause, more like Crohn's, colitis, much more severe type inflammation in the digestive tract. And they can move through that inflamed, open, permeable lining and then move into the body from starting in the digestive tract. And that's a common cause, but it's not the only cause. Like, I really do believe people under the age of, say, 50 down, that they have had so many antibiotics as children, and then also the other thing, that's caused their yeast infection. But another thing that I became very clear about when I began working with autistic children, because I'm very fascinated with the prenatal period of life. And I studied that in college. Actually, I have a degree in child development. And, was always trying to dig into the research to find out about what happens in the womb. And, there wasn't nearly as much available as there is today. It's an amazing amount of research to understand what's happening in this really very critical period in our development. What's happening is the mother has a yeast infection. She took antibiotics, maybe for acne, or maybe was even born with it herself, or she's been eating a high sugar diet. And so what happens is she has the yeast in her body. Maybe it's not really, really bad, like on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 5 or something. But now when she's pregnant, her progesterone will go up, her glucose will go up, her estrogen will go up, which all these things are healthy. They need to go up so the baby develops normally. But the elevated glucose, the elevated progesterone, and so on, that actually feeds the yeast and makes that infection in her body now much more acute. So it's very natural, really, for her to pass this infection on to this baby developing inside of her. So the baby's born with a yeast infection. And that's where, again, you'll look for signs like the inner ecosystem isn't forming and the baby is gassy and bloating and crying and screaming and not sleeping well. And when they go to the bathroom, they might be constipated and then they have diarrhea. So, all this is something that mothers don't tie back to the fact that the baby was born with a yeast infection. And I think this is one of the most important parts of what I'm trying to teach all the time with teaching about candidiasis, is that so many people are starting life with this infection, and there's something you can do right from the very, very beginning that changes the entire scenario and turns a unhealthy baby into a very, very healthy baby.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I know that as we're talking about this, good and bad bacteria make such a big difference in the body. Let's talk a little bit about good and bad bacteria. Let's talk about also what is the actual main cause of Candida? Because I know that there's a lot of things out there, potentially from stress to foods to lack of something in the diet. I'd love for you to bring us through sort of what I would call the vicious cycle of how does this start with most people? I mean, you were saying, I know you even mentioned a lot of children are born without enough probiotics. So what are the stages that you see through life from that to the birthing to breastfeeding to antibiotic? Walk us through how people, really get to this stage.
Well, if the person's young, and I mean, young to me is like mid 40s to even maybe as early as, old as 50, they're in that generation. They really have an excellent chance of having come into the world with it because, particularly, I mean, I have my oldest child is 43 now, I think. And I remember very clearly being a mother, not knowing at all what I know today. And every time she, from the beginning, of her life, she came down with her first throat problem, like strep throat or ear infection or whatever. You take your baby to the doctor because you're worried about their health. And immediately, back in those days, doctors just wrote prescriptions for antibiotics like they were prescriptions for candy or something. There were just a very few doctors at that time who were beginning to say, hey, this isn't healthy to do this. So most children were given antibiotics all their life. And then, of course, they turned into teenagers and their skin broke out. And that was the perfect solution again for clear skin, was an antibiotic. And also birth control pills. Women use birth control pills. And it was also prescribed for having a pretty healthy skin. So there was a great overuse of drugs far back as 40 something years ago. And then, so I really believe that's the number one cause. But let's say you did get into, maybe you came from Hungary and your mother did never take antibiotics and you were very fortunate and you weren't born with the infection. So now, though, you get the acne or, whatever, and you start taking a round of antibiotics and the first round doesn't work. And so you stay on another round. But with women, they stay on a low dose antibiotic for, and one a day for maybe years. Many women have done that, along with their fluctuating hormones. They absolutely create a yeast infection in their body. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, they get pregnant, the infection becomes more acute, they pass that on to their baby. I think that is the cause. But a high sugar diet is definitely enough of a cause to create one in your gut because, if you've got the yeast in the gut, and you destroy the bacteria. And high sugar diet destroys the bacteria. Stress destroys the bacteria. So we live in a world where we're doing all these things: high sugar diet, stress, taking drugs like antibiotics, steroids too, by the way. Steroids are really bad at making a yeast infection grow in your body. So we just unknowingly are doing this. Again, yeast are naturally present in the body, but they're in a completely different form. But once they become pathogenic and they grow those tentacles and they start burrowing into wherever they are, into the lungs, into the ears or the sinuses or, the vagina or wherever they are, that's when they're in a very pathogenic form. And it's very hard to get rid of them unless you are willing to eat properly. I mean, the most important thing is to eat right and build that healthy gut microbiome because that's your immune system. And you've really got to rely on the immune system to conquer this infection for you. You can't get into your lungs or into your sinus infection. Well, you can actually treat the sinuses, but it's not, it's a challenge to do that. And if you're eating sugar all the time, you're constantly keeping that infection growing. And they're controlling the terrain, which happens to be your body.
Great information there, Donna. Well, let's talk about a few other things. So we've talked about you've covered the cause of Candida. Talk about the biggest foods that maybe would even surprise people that people are eating that can actually contribute to these Candida issues. And then after that, let's go ahead and start jumping into maybe some of the foods that can help eliminate it. But first, let's talk about these foods that really contribute to Candida.
Well, of course, number one is sugar and carbs. So, but paleo is really big these days, the word paleo, but we've been paleo for about 20 years because I saw right away as I started learning how to deal with this that people can't have sugar in their diet at all. They really have to be strict. And so at that time, when I first started it, a lot of people were into juicing, for example, and they would make the juice taste good. So they put in carrots and beets sweet things, but that's way too sweet. Even juicing by itself, if you leave out the carrots and the beets, you're taking away the fiber. And when you're juicing, I prefer people to do smoothies because you use your blender and you leave the fiber in. But when you remove that fiber, the juice goes into your body so quickly that feeds the yeast too. So I think sugar, but anything that destroys the gut microbiome, besides the obvious antibiotic or steroids or birth control pills, the other thing is just destroying the microbiome with a high sugar diet with stress. And everybody, I think, experiences some form of stress today because we tend to be overachievers. We're wanting life to be rich and full, and we want to be busy. We want to accomplish a lot. Most of the stress, and for many of us, I'd say most of the stress is actually caused by our own ambition and desires to live a happy life.
Yeah. So let's talk about, we know sugar is an issue. You've covered a lot of these things. So if somebody's trying to follow this diet, because I think a lot of times, Donna, people feel overwhelmed. They hear, I've got to go on a Candida diet. I can never eat sugar again. I can never, a lot of times it really seems like an overwhelming task to kill off Candida, to get rid of it, to overcome these health issues. And as you're saying, I think that, a majority of health issues we're talking about today, from hormone imbalances like endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome, even to cancer today, and a number of other health issues, weight gain. We found that a lot of these, leaky gut, a lot of these issues are linked to and have what's in common with this issue with Candida. What does your anti-Candida diet look like? And so for you, Donna, what would you recommend your patients consume for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks? What are some of those best foods that can help eliminate Candida issues?
Well, there's plenty of foods left to eat when you start leaving out the carbs and sugars. But I think the place to start, if a person feels like this is overwhelming, and I don't think as many people feel that way today. I think we have so many wonderfully educated people today that today it wouldn't seem like such a difficult diet to do. But I agree with you. Years ago, people would say, oh, this diet sounds so good. I know I need to do it. But it seems hard to do. But it isn't really, because if you're doing paleo, you're already there for the most part. You're almost there. One of the things we learned with autistic children, we've had incredible results with autistic children and getting them full. Many of them have hundreds of fully recovered. They all have a yeast infection. They all respond to a diet where you're dealing with the yeast and bringing the yeast infection under control. One of the things I learned in working with them is that they're not very cooperative, and that's all they want to eat are carbs. And so what we said to the moms is, okay, that's all right. Just start adding something fermented to your diet. So they started with the fermented coconut water, because that's something that was similar to, they could put juice in it or put it in whatever they were drinking, really. And believe it or not, it started to change them a lot, because you were beginning to change the gut. So the coconut kefir is just taking coconut water, which is way too sweet, really loaded with sugar, but it's great for fermenting. And we fermented it, and people started drinking. The kids, 9 years ago, kids started drinking it, and they started getting well. They came out of their brain fog. They started, participating in eating healthy foods and so on. But because you're changing the gut, you're changing the brain. And so that's a really good place to start. Many of the children love the fermented vegetables. Every child is different, so some would, the coconut water kefir everybody could drink because they could hide it. And then after 4 or 5 days, the kids didn't even care. They just kept drinking it and drinking it. They loved it so much, they didn't even want it in a juice anymore. So the ones who drank the most were the ones who seemed to have the most benefits immediately. But then many of the children also ate the fermented cultured vegetables. And believe it or not, years ago, when I started body ecology, nobody was eating these fermented foods. Now it's become popular. There's even a wonderful book out on paleo and fermentation that I can't remember the name of it, but I think it's a beautiful book. And I'm so excited to see all the last 2 years, there's been a bunch of books that appeared on Amazon talking about fermentation. And this is a big deal, because when we eat foods that are rich in these wonderful microbes, that's how we build the gut, the microbiota, the inner ecosystem in our gut, or the microbiome. And that's the secret to building a strong immune system, to being able to digest your foods, to being able to throw this off. So fermented foods have to come first. And then I said to people 20 years ago, look, you can't have sugar, you can't have carbs. And of course, in those days, people thought you have to have a sugar, otherwise, where will you get your energy? Or you're crazy. But then, fortunately, I was able to discover the white stevia powder, which we called stevia, but it was actually Rhodioxide, and it tasted quite nice. And many people loved it. I started with the powder, but turned it into a dropper so that it was more convenient for people, and then started teaching people, look, have a glass of lemonade, but put the stevia, put water and lemon juice in together and put in stevia, and you'll drink that a couple of times a day and you'll be perfectly satisfied for sweets. Or have tea at the end of the meal, because a warm cup of tea helps you digest your food. Put 2 drops of stevia in your digestive tea, and that's sweet. And your body's perfectly happy because it's had something sweet. It doesn't need a piece of pumpkin pie or something. So, teaching people better alternatives was an important start for us. And then, of course, I think it's very, very important for people to change their oils, eliminating the really bad oils like corn oil and canola oil and vegetable oils that you find in all the processed foods on the market. And mostly it's what you get in restaurants. So even if you go in the restaurant and they say, oh, no, we use olive oil, and then I say to them, really, can you be very, very careful and go back in the kitchen and check for me, because I'm extremely allergic to vegetable oil and my eyes swell up. They do kind of get a little puffy, actually. And then they go back and they check and they come back and they say, oh, no, it's not. It's a mixture of olive oil and vegetable oil or canola oil or something. So they're not using good oils in restaurants. You have to, tell them you only can have olive oil or butter when you're eating out. So just, teaching people those simple things. Change your oils, use stevia, or we've also now, over the years, found another sweetener over in Japan and brought that over. And so you can go to type in Lakanto, Lakanto. I was really excited to find that, because I got an email once from a mother, and she said, it was to our whole Bedrock group. We have a group for autism called Bedrock. And she was emailing the group, and she said, my son's birthday's coming up, and I feel so badly I can't give him birthday cakes or cupcakes. And I thought, that is too bad. I'm going to figure out what to do. And thanks to what I always feel is divine, grace, really, I was able to stumble upon this sugar substitute over in Japan. And you can't bake with stevia because everything comes out kind of flat and anemic looking. But this you can bake with really well. It makes lovely cakes and cupcakes and all. But it's really totally sugar-free. So that was a nice little plus. Actually, working with the children, creating a better world for our children has been one of the things that most motivates me to get up and do the work that I do every day, because our children are in trouble. And particularly when they're born with this condition and no one knows about it, it's affecting their brain and their moods. And, there's so many things that you find with that are related to the brain, for example, like sleep disorders. People are not sleeping today. Migraine headaches, the fact that we're anxious and worried all the time, and we have obsessive compulsive behaviors are related to yeast, because that they make you deficient in serotonin and GABA and dopamine. These are really important neurotransmitters. There's even a link between Alzheimer's and this too. And I know I kind of got off the subject about food, but the diet is not difficult to do. We do have the addition of fermented foods, and we also teach people how to prepare the food so they're easier to digest. But a really good day would be waking up in the morning and having water, because we wake up very dehydrated and we wake up acidic. And so we want to alkalize our body when we first wake up and hydrate it. So and give it energy. So a great thing is have a couple of big glasses of water, like 12 ounces, and put in some good minerals. I like liquid fulvic minerals from a company like Omega. You can put a dropper full of those in your water. And that's a great way because you're alkalizing and hydrating at the same time and giving your body energy because the adrenals and thyroid love minerals. And then, after you've had your water and taken your supplements or something, then, I like for people to take that probiotic drink that you were talking about, Josh. One is called Energy Biotic or Cocoa Biotic. We have 3 of them. Put a little bit of that in a juice glass and add some juice to it, like a little bit of maybe pomegranate or cranberry juice, something very sour that doesn't have any. Yesterday, I found this wonderful hibiscus concentrate that was great. So I bought some of that, and you put a little bit of that in with 3 or 4 ounces of the, say, Energy Biotic, and now you've just made what we call a probiotic juice. Instead of having orange juice or tomato juice, this is our version of a juice. And you can put in some stevia if you want to sweeten it. But the good thing about doing that is these very sour fruits actually awaken the adrenals. And 10 minutes later, you'll notice you have energy and you don't need that cup of coffee. But you're also hydrating and alkalizing, and you're putting good bacteria in your gut, which is very important because now you're going to start eating. And it's good to have the bacteria down in your gut to help you digest the foods you're going to be eating for the rest of the day. So let's say the next thing you have is a wonderful green smoothie. And in bodycology, if somebody has a yeast infection, we say, keep the fruit in your smoothie down to about 10% of your formula. So 90% vegetables, 10% might be a green apple or some frozen cherries or blueberries or something. As you bring your yeast infection under control, you can change that percentage and go more like 20-80. But that's always a really good rule of thumb is in making your smoothies. I love smoothies because they've got the fiber. We need fiber for a healthy gut microbiome. Everybody's panning carbohydrates today because so many people are going with paleo, but all foods have a positive and negative side to them. And having some healthy fiber and even some low carbohydrate foods prepared properly, so you get rid of the phytic acid, for example, and the lectins, having that in a meal is actually helping you have a healthier microbiome. And so there's you have to kind of understand the nature of all foods. Like, what is their front? What is their back? Is this right for me? Do I need this positive side that these carbs have? And if you want a healthy gut microbiome, you do want to go back to having a small amount of carbs. We start off with quinoa and millet, but then you can move over to rice or oatmeal. I like for people to eat whole oat groats, not just the cut up oats, but the whole ones. You can begin to move back to those kind of foods, but also in bodycology, every time you have a meal, whether it's a protein and vegetable meal, which we prefer people to do at lunchtime, by the way. I think animal protein should be eaten between 11 and 2. That's the best time for the body to utilize the energy that the animal protein provides. It's the healthiest thing for the liver to have it between 11 and 2. And always have something fermented, though, with that protein meal, because the bacteria then are going to help you digest that protein. And bacteria are eating the fiber from the vegetables. It's a great thing to have for lunch. Then dinner, I actually like for people to go to more of a vegetarian dinner. They can have all vegetables, and they can have some starchy vegetables like a potato or artichoke or butternut squash that they've soup. We have a great recipe in the book for butternut squash soup. That would be a great thing to have, but with vegetables, with a salad. And then always put something fermented in the evening meal too, because once again, you want the bacteria helping you gobble up and digest that food for you. That's what they do. They're extracting minerals. They're looking at the food and saying, oh, there's not enough B vitamins here. Let's make some more. They're very, very important for properly digesting proteins so that they are broken down and don't become a toxin in your body. But I like to keep that 80-20 rule also going for the proteins, because 20% proteins, 80% vegetables on your plate when you're plating up your meal. Because if you're eating a really high protein diet, not many vegetables, you're making your body quite acidic. And again, that's what the yeast love. They love it when you keep an acidic environment for them to thrive in.
As you're talking about, alkalinity is important. In fact, I've used the liquid fulvic acid in the form of shilajit in my smoothies in the morning, and absolutely love that. So great advice there. So
Brilliant. That's so important. Do people know what the Shilajit is? It's great for energy. I mean, why do you use it, Josh?
I use it because it's so high in earth-based minerals. It's found in I believe in the Himalayan mountains, and so it's a really mineral dense powder, really. And so I'll put about a half a teaspoon in my smoothie, but it's very high in magnesium. It's got good amounts of iron. It's loaded with manganese, and a lot of, they say it has over 80 trace minerals. So very high in trace minerals. And this would be a whole other discussion, Donna, and I don't want to get too off tangent here, but this is also why I'm a huge fan of both plant or food-based probiotics as well as even getting some soil-based probiotics. In fact, I was writing an article recently on Eat Dirt, and it was all about how when you go to a local farmer's market, there's actually small little bacteria on those even when you wash them off. And I read a study recently saying it helps you digest starch. But today, I was again doing other research, finding that a lot of our produce is sprayed with a chlorine-based substance, and so all biotics are completely destroyed when we're shopping, especially at the conventional grocery store. And that's why I'm a huge fan of going to a local farmer's market and doing a lot of the stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah, I agree with you. When I was interviewing Dr. Stephen Olmsted, he was talking about biofilms, which is a very, very fascinating topic. And he said that when you pick up a plum, for example, and you see that kind of white blush on the skin of the plum, don't wipe that off because that's a biofilm of really healthy bacteria. And of course, the plants have been in the soil. That's where they came from, the earth. And they do have earth bacteria. I think that was a brilliant thing that you just said. People are afraid of the dirt. And yet we find from the research that children that grow up on farms that are playing in the dirt and digging and playing with animals, they're the ones that have the strongest immune system. But then you've got that really big concern. Like one of the things you're going to start hearing a lot about here in LA is this serious infection that's starting to be they're finding it on foods. And what's happening is they're bringing in migrant workers from countries like Mexico and having them work in the fields to do all the picking. And then they just go to the bathroom right there in the fields, and then they bring in this pathogen. And it's actually some of the doctors here, the functional medicine doctors here in LA are very concerned because they're picking up this, people are picking up and testing positive for this pathogen. And so do you wash your food or not? They're saying, yes, wash it off. Even put a little chlorine in the water, Clorox in the water, and big tub of water, like a big sink, and then put a couple of drops of Clorox and put your veggies in there for a little while. And gosh, I think you need to find your source. Me too. I'm a fan of farmers markets. And I talk to the farmers and say, what size is your farm? What else are you growing there? And who picks your vegetables for you? And like the other day, the last time, Saturday, I was at the farmer's market, and this woman said, well, we're just a small family farm. And I thought, great, I'm going to buy my my food from you because I know, it's cleaner. But that's everything has a front and a back and a positive, negative side to it. But maybe it's also a good argument for people who have land, growing some of your own food.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, doing your own farming, there are so many benefits there. And yeah, I could get off on another tangent there, but I won't. So last couple questions here, Donna. One of my other questions was, what are the best supplements? And so when you have, let's say you've got a client or a patient come into you and you put them on this eating plan, do you put them on any other supplements as well with that?
Well, you can buy antifungal herbals, like olive oregano is an excellent one. And there are companies that make anti-Candida supplements, like groups of them put together to take. But I found out early on that just by changing the diet, there's so much die-off of yeast. And when they're dying off, they're secreting toxins. The dead bodies of the dying yeast are toxic. And bodies today aren't very good at clearing all these toxins that we have in our body, including the ones the yeast are making and the ones that they're making when they're dying. So you give them someone a product in the beginning stages when they are having all this die off, they're going to be so miserable. I mean, there's some people that have candidiasis so badly that they can't function, and they need someone helping them, cooking the foods and taking care of them. I'm a big fan on home enemas and colonics in those early stages to keep those detoxification pathways open, because I don't think the normal pathways that we were given, like God, when our body was created, we were allowed to have this amazing system in place to get rid of our toxins. But now our toxins, there are too many of them. Our toxins detoxification system is overburdened. We can't clear them fast enough. So we have to help out with colonics and enemas and so on. That's really going to take a person smoothly through those early stages. And the water, if they're doing home enemas, I always like them to put in those fulvic minerals. We absorb those minerals up into the body and create energy. So in body ecology, one of our 7 principles teaches people about where do you start? What's the first thing that you've got to do? The first thing is you've got to create energy. And for so many people, they're stuck right there. They're like in a hole and they can't get out of that hole and start healing because they don't have the energy to do that. So I actually would prefer to see people take supplements that help them create more energy, maybe help them sleep better because they're not sleeping well, or they have an issue with their thyroid or their adrenals. The thyroid and the adrenals both need minerals. The thyroid needs selenium and iodine, and zinc is very important. And also the thyroid needs healthy fats, particularly the fats with A and D in them. And the thyroid needs tyrosine. Tyrosine is a really important amino acid that you can buy in the store. I mean, I'd rather somebody take tyrosine and, take one 500 milligram capsule in the morning. And then if they've got enough iodine in their diet, or taking 1 milligram of iodine, the T from the tyrosine and the 4 iodine molecules are going to make T4, which is where your energy comes from your thyroid. So there's little things like that I prefer people do. Also, another very important amino acid is taurine, because one of the many things that the yeast are doing that's quite damaging is depleting the body of taurine. And so many people today don't know it, but they're very sensitive to oxalates that you find in plant foods. I mean, here we are telling people eat an 80% plant-based diet, which is going to have oxalates in it. Like, people are putting tons of eating nuts and seeds, and they're putting almond milk in their smoothies, and they're putting spinach in their smoothies, and they're eating a lot of chocolate for their little treat once a day, a little square of chocolate. But all those things are very high in oxalates, and we're reacting to oxalates like never before. That's because we have the candidiasis in our body, this yeast infection. And one of the things we know is that there's a connection between oxalates and candidiasis, and there's a huge connection between oxalates and taurine. The yeast prevent the taurine from getting into the cell, so you end up urinating it out. And it causes depression, it causes heart, palpitations, and people don't sleep well. Taurine is the calming amino acid. It's very important for the brain and for the heart. So I would love for people to take taurine. They could take 1,000 milligrams twice a day. For some people, it even helps. It immediately helps with their energy. And also, there's a lot of people today that are anemic, but not necessarily because they have iron deficiency anemia. They're actually a deficiency in taurine will cause anemia. So I go that way more than going with antifungals. Create energy, put back into your body the nutrients that your body may most likely is deficient in. And that's always a good idea, to take a test like your doctor can order a test from somewhere like SpectraCell or the NutraEval from Genova. Because those are the tests that say, oh, you are deficient in B6 or B12 or taurine. I think that you will be deficient in certain nutrients, and correct those deficiencies.
Great point. I think some people can even overdo, as you're saying, Donna, these antifungals like oregano oil. Not that there's not a place for it. I think there definitely is. But I like what you're saying, is that it's more about rebuilding the body, creating a certain environment there. And you don't have to necessarily treat every issue. You just got to get the body healthy. And I love that. As well. And that's some new information. I love what you're teaching here. I was very familiar with tyrosine, not as familiar with taurine. And that's cutting edge. That's great.
Well, just a couple of quick thoughts too. Taking digestive enzymes is very smart. Usually, people, with candidiasis, their digestive tract isn't working. You really need the support of digestive enzymes. And then also, what about a probiotic? Well, we were having people eating fermented foods. I think just taking a probiotic is by itself is kind of wimpy, but I think adding a probiotic to your body every day, particularly the ones that are rich in bifidus. Lately, I've been recommending one made by Renew Life called Flora Baby, and it's made for babies, but it's great for adults. It's a powder, and you can just put it into something. But those are the bacteria that are really predominant in our gut in the very beginning of life. And I like to copy nature. I figure when our bodies were created, they were created just perfectly for us. And we need to go back and see how nature does things. And so nature puts these bifidus bacteria in our gut when we're born. And so I like for people to start there. And also bifidus is an easy bacteria to destroy. A high sugar, high fat diet destroys bifidus, and then that causes an inflammation in the gut and an overgrowth of a pathogenic bad guy called Wadsworthia, who creates the inflammation. So bifidus is a great one to take, and also a lot of people are constipated. Bifidus is a great bacteria to put in your gut if you're constipated. And now that we're testing more and more people for their genes, we've found out that a lot of people have what's called the FUT2 gene, FUT2, and that gene keeps you from assimilating and absorbing bifidus, and so the bifidus has a really hard time growing in your gut. So once again, bifidus is just a really good probiotic to put in your gut.
Wow, awesome. Love it. Well, I totally agree. Bifidus species is, I know that I've used a lot of bifidum, as well as the infidus, which I think is great too.
Yeah, exactly. These are all in the Flora Baby formula, but other companies have them too. But just be sure you're not just getting acidophilus. Our drinks, our fermented vegetables and the probiotic liquids and all, they tend to be skewed toward providing acidophilus to people. So I like for people to, it's hard to get bifidus in your body. You have to make a special effort, and that's a good supplement to buy.
Love it. Well, Donna, this has been just awesome. So much great information from you here on the best supplements and the best things that people can do to overcome Candida. And I want to just go through a few things that I know that I really got from your lecture here. One was it really, so much of this goes back to lifestyle. And number one, if you are, in the system today where your doctor's recommending antibiotic drugs, or you have kids today and they're recommending antibiotic drugs, that's one of the first times in life where these issues can start is right from there. And if you're a mom right now, start getting more probiotics in your diet. And Donna, the other thing too that I love about what you teach is supplements are for supplementing your diet. We need to be eating these foods, not just taking probiotic supplements. People try and take the shortcut, and those are great. I take one every day, but you've got to do the probiotic-rich foods, as you're saying, and that is one of the biggest things, is consuming a diet high in alkaline foods, consuming a diet high in probiotics, eliminating or lowering some of the oxalates that are in your diet as well, and following that sort of diet. Also, the tyrosine and taurine, look into that. It's also very supportive for both gut and thyroid health, as well as taurine and iron. And the probiotic Donna recommends, or one of the ones she recommends, is the Renew Life Baby Flora. And Donna also has some great probiotic supplements on her website. And you can check out Donna's website at bodyecology.com. Again, that's bodyecology.com. And I want to recommend a few products for you to go on there and get. And one of those is her Cocoa Biotic product, which is great. And I'll tell you, Donna, one of the things I've been using of yours for, goodness, it's probably been 8 years now or so. It's been a long time. Is your kefir starter kit. Go home. You can make your own coconut kefir. You can make kefir is one of what I believe to be one of the top superfoods in the entire world today. And so, again, I know I was actually visiting a friend in Houston who's a doctor there. And I saw he had this pack sitting on the counter of your kefir starter kit, and I was raving about it, and telling him I was interviewing you here in a week or so. And so anyways, Don, I want to say thanks. This has been awesome. Any final words as people really look to restore and heal their digestive health and get rid of Candida?
No, you did such a beautiful job summarizing. Thank you. I love to do interviews with you, Josh. You're so good at this.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks, Donna, again. Again, everybody check out bodyecology.com. Check out the cocoa biotics, the probiotics, and some of the great things Donna has on her store. I want to say thanks again, Donna, for being part of the Natural Cure Summit and you sharing with us your Candida cures as well as natural remedies for digestive issues, for mood, and for just general healing the body. So everybody, I hope everybody's enjoyed this interview. I'm sure you have, like I have. We look forward to the next interview, and thanks for being part of the Natural Cure Summit.